Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhaso, and this morning I'll be going over another discourse of the Buddha. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the discourse and give some explanations, and then I'll take any questions at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. The sutta for this morning is from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 3, sutta number 95, the Parisā Sutta. So the word Parisā means assembly or group. So a group of people usually. And in the suttas, the term Parisā, most commonly it's talking about a group of practitioners, a group of monks, a group of lay people. Occasionally it's used in more general terms. But most commonly it's talking about a group of Buddhist practitioners who are living together. And most commonly it's talking about a group of monks. So the word Parisā is often used almost synonymously with the word Sangha, in meaning a community of monks. Which is how it's being used in this particular sutta. In this particular sutta, the term Parisā is being used to mean the monastic Sangha. So the sutta begins, the Buddha says, mendicants. So mendicant here is a translation of the word bhikkhu. So a literal translation of the word bhikkhu, which means beggar or mendicant. So the Buddha says, mendicants, that's bhikkhus. And it's also important to note, by the way, I mention this from time to time, but it's good mentioning it again. So in the Pali language, whenever one is using the plural form of a mixed gender group, one always uses the plural masculine form. So whenever the Buddha is talking to a group of both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, he would say bhikkhus. But that doesn't mean he's only talking to the male monks present. It means he's talking to everyone present. So it's just the structure of the language. It doesn't necessarily imply exclusion. So he's saying monks, which again, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who are present. He says, monks, these are the three assemblies, the three parisā, the three kinds of groups of practitioners. What three? He says, an assembly of the best, a divided assembly, and a harmonious assembly. So in Pali, that's agavati parisā. So agavati means it has the best, it has the supreme. Has the highest quality, the peak. Vagga parisā means it's a group that's divided into factions. So the word vagga means faction. So vagga parisā means it's broken up into little cliques, little separate subgroups. The third one is samagga parisā. So the word samagga is commonly translated as harmonious, but that's actually not quite what it means. The word samagga is from the prefix sa, which means with or together, and the word magga, which means path. So the same magga that we get when talking about, for example, the Noble Eightfold Path. Arya Atangika Magga, the Noble Eightfold Magga, the Noble Eightfold Path. So sa magga parisā means that it's a group where everyone is on the same path. In particular, everyone is following the Noble Eightfold Path. Everyone is committed to a shared understanding and application of Dhamma. So samagga parisā means everyone's on the same path. Everyone's following the Noble Eightfold Path. And this becomes important in terms of talking about what does it actually mean to have a samagga parisā? What does it actually mean to be on the same path? Translating it as harmonious kind of misses the flavor of what the Buddha is saying here. So samagga parisā means a group where everyone's on the same path. Everyone's following the same Noble Eightfold Path. So then the Buddha defines each of these three terms. So the first one, he says, and what is an assembly of the best? So what is the agavati parisā? The group of the best kind of people, best kind of monks. And he says, it's an assembly where the senior monks are not indulgent or slack, nor are they backsliders. Instead, they take the lead in seclusion, rousing energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. And those who come afterwards follow their example. They too are not indulgent or slack, nor are they backsliders. Instead, they take the lead in seclusion, rousing energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. This is called an assembly of the best. So this is the first kind of group that he's talking about. So again, here he's talking about a group of monks, so bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. And he says what defines the best kind of group, or the group which has the best kind of people, is where the senior monks are sincere in their practice. They're really making a genuine, appropriate effort to practice well. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're perfect. Doesn't necessarily mean that they've attained any stage of awakening. What it means is that they're making a genuine effort to practice the Dhamma. And then, because the senior monks are making a genuine effort to practice the Dhamma, then the junior monks take that as their example, as their role models, and they also do their best to practice well. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is absolutely perfect. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is always behaving in the most proper way. But rather it means that everybody is making a sincere effort to practice the Dhamma. Then the second kind of assembly, so the Buddha says, what is a divided assembly? So this means, again, a group of people who've subdivided into groups, into little cliques, factions. Which is quite common, especially when you have a group larger than a handful of people. Especially when a group gets to be larger than 10 or 15 people, then very naturally it tends to start subdividing into subgroups, into little cliques, which each have their own shared values, shared opinions, shared habits, shared interests, and so on. So it's quite normal that happens when you get especially larger groups of people, over 15 people or so. But the Buddha here is being a bit more specific. So he says, what is a divided assembly? So an assembly that's broken up into factions. And he says, it's an assembly where the monks argue, quarrel, and dispute, continually wounding each other with barbed words. This is called a divided assembly. So the Buddha is being a bit more specific here. So it's not just that the community is divided into groups. Like you have over here, you have the monks who like to study Pali and discuss Pali together. Over here, you have the ones who are really big on the Anguttara Nikaya. Over there, you have the ones who are always doing samadhi practice together. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about where there's subgroups that are constantly arguing and fighting with each other. So where there's some kind of internal political disputes going on in the monastery. So separate factions which are each attempting to control the others, attempting to push their views and opinions on the other groups, or attempting to get the others to take on their stance or their approach to things. So it's when there's internal infighting within the Sangha. That's what he's talking about here. Then the third one, he says, what is a harmonious assembly? So again, this is Samagga Parisā, which again means everyone on the same path, everyone with the same path. And he says, it's an assembly where the monks live in harmony. So again, Samagga, they're with the same path. Appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes. This is called a harmonious assembly. And the Buddha says, when the mendicants live in harmony like this, they create much merit. And he goes on from here, but first I'll talk a little bit more about the harmonious assembly. So first off, living together, following the same path. This actually is very important. So one of the critical bases for harmony in a community, it's not necessarily going with the flow or following the rules or giving in to the other people's opinions or whatever. So a harmonious assembly does not necessarily mean conformity. Doesn't necessarily mean everybody doing exactly the same thing at the same time in the same way. But a harmonious assembly here, again, it means that everyone there is committed to following the Noble Eightfold Path. Everybody has a shared practice of Dhamma. So this is quite different from, for example, if you had a group where one person is there because they're trying to accumulate wealth, and somebody else is there because they're trying to gain political influence, and somebody else is there because they just really like the fashion, and somebody else is there because they like to study Hinduism, and somebody else is there because they're really into Jainism, and then somebody else is there because they're actually trying to study and practice the Buddhist teachings. This is where you have a problem. Because instead of everybody being committed to following the Noble Eightfold Path, instead you have different people with different motives. Different people who have a different basic foundation for what they're doing, for how they're living their life, or what they're trying to do with their monastic life. And this is what creates a genuine discord among people. And it can also happen even within Buddhist groups, where you get, for example, some people who are trying to practice early Buddhism, so studying the early discourses, trying to practice Dhamma Vinaya in accordance with the early discourses. And then somebody else whose practice is entirely based upon commentary or literature. They're not interested in the Vinaya, they're not interested in the suttas, they just want to meditate 20 hours a day following the instructions in the commentaries. It's like, well, that actually creates a bit of a problem, because then you effectively have different people on different paths. Different people with a different set of doctrines, a different set of practices, so then effectively on a different path. So again, harmonious here, the word samagga means on the same path. So practicing the same teachings. So following the same Dhamma Vinaya. Again, doesn't necessarily mean everybody behaving in exactly the same way. It doesn't mean living in a community of clones. But rather it means everybody has a shared commitment to Dhamma Vinaya, a shared commitment to the Eightfold Path. And he says they appreciate each other. So sammodamana. More literally it means rejoicing together. So rejoicing together means enjoying the opportunity to be practicing together with other people who have a similar commitment to the Eightfold Path. And also looking for the things to appreciate about each other. Like Bhante Wade, who's always friendly and smiling and cheerful. It's like, oh, that's something we can appreciate. We can enjoy being together with people like that. Or someone who has a sincere commitment to Dhamma. So people like Ayasoma, who their face just lights up with joy anytime one is discussing the Buddhist teachings. It's like, oh, that's something we can really enjoy being with. We can really enjoy being together with. So rejoicing together, appreciating each other. So not quarreling, not arguing. So avivadamana means not arguing. So, I mean, sometimes it's important to discuss things. It's important to sometimes even clarify where there's different opinions about something. But we do so without acrimony. We do so without hostility. We do so without attachment to our own views. We do so with a genuine willingness to understand the situation better, and a genuine willingness to relinquish our own views if our own views are seen to be problematic. So it's possible to have discussions around opposing viewpoints, but without arguing, without quarreling, without fighting. And he says, blending like milk and water. So the point is, when you mix milk and water together, then they become indistinguishable. You can't then separate them out again. So it's the opposite of, for example, mixing oil and water. When you mix oil and water, if you wait a little bit, then the oil separates again. It doesn't actually mix together. So the point of blending like milk and water means that we're allowing each other to be what we each are. So it's not trying to force the people around you to change in order to fit your own views and opinions. But rather it's allowing all of us to evenly mix together without conflict. And finally, regarding each other with kindly eyes. So this is one line which I find really adorable. So whenever we look at each other with eyes of friendship, eyes of affection. So piya chakku, it's translated here as kindly eyes, but the word piya means affection or loving. So piya chakku, we look at each other with friendly eyes, affectionate eyes, loving eyes. Just noticing what a difference that makes, instead of being like, oh, that Bhante Wade, he took the last brownie, that horrible monster. So instead it's just like, oh buddy, hi buddy, I'm so glad you're here with us. And silently, don't say that out loud, that's creepy. But with your eyes, you look at each other with the kind of eyes that are like, oh, these are my friends. And I'm so happy to be here with these lovely friends. And notice how that trains the mind, when you look at everyone with friendly eyes. So again, the Buddha carries on. He then says, when the monks live in harmony like this, they create much merit. At that time, the monks are living in a holy dwelling. So holy dwelling here in Pali is Brahmavihara. So holy dwelling is a very literal translation of the word Brahmavihara. But it's important to understand what the Buddha is doing here. So he says that in this, the monks are living in a Brahmavihara. So he's talking about how when one is cultivating this attitude of when you have a group of people who all have a shared commitment to the Eightfold Path, and they're all appreciating each other, enjoying being together in a sincere group of practitioners, avoiding unnecessary arguments and disputing, making a conscious effort to blend together and to look at each other with friendly eyes, then what is that doing? Well, a community life of that sort naturally trains the mind in the Brahmaviharas. It naturally helps the mind to cultivate loving kindness, compassion, joyfulness, and equanimity, the four Brahmaviharas. And that's what the Buddha is talking about here. He's talking about how when we make a sincere effort to cultivate harmonious, path-based community like this, then that naturally supports the growth and development of the Brahmaviharas within the heart. And you'll notice here the Buddha is not talking about meditation. He's not talking about sit down cross-legged for 20 hours a day and practice metta. That's not what he's talking about. Rather, he's talking about how cultivating spiritual community life naturally creates the conditions for the development of metta in the heart. Naturally leads to the development of the Brahmaviharas, these divine mind states. So this is actually one of the major emphases that we find in the early suttas, is on training the mind under every condition. So not just as a meditation practice, but rather using every condition in our life as a way of training the mind in wholesome states. So the Buddha says at that time the monks live in a holy dwelling. In other words, the monks are training themselves in the Brahmaviharas. And he says, that is the heart's release by rejoicing. So that's muditaya ceto vimuttiya. So ceto vimutti is translated here as heart's release. It's also translated as liberation of mind, or mental liberation. So through cultivating the Brahmaviharas, the mind experiences a sense of freedom and spaciousness. Why is that? Well, first and foremost, it's because the mind is no longer constricted by hostility. The mind is no longer constricted by the defilement of aversion. So when we cultivate this attitude of friendliness and mutual appreciation, then hostility and aversion melt away from the heart. And that allows the heart to feel spacious and free, unconstricted. It gives a sense of vastness and ease to the mind. And it also then conduces the mind towards complete liberation, because we're starting to train the mind to break its habits of defilement, its habit of aversion in particular. And also, again, when we're cultivating this heart of loving kindness and compassion, of joyfulness and equanimity, then the mind also becomes increasingly content. And when the mind is content, then it's free of greed, it's free of desire. It's no longer wanting anything in particular. It's no longer craving any specific experience. So this also conduces towards ultimate liberation of mind. And it also creates the conditions for samadhi, which is what the Buddha says next. So he says, when one is joyful, euphoria arises. When the mind is full of euphoria, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, one feels bliss. And when one is blissful, the mind enters samadhi. So in Pali, pamuditassa piti jayati. So when one is joyful, then piti arises, euphoria. So this is based upon, again, cultivating harmonious path-based community life where we're treating each other with kindness and compassion and friendliness and mutual appreciation. Then the Buddha is saying that naturally creates the condition to experience joy and euphoria. And here it's particularly, he's talking about during meditation. So then, again, you spend your whole day cultivating this attitude of friendliness and mutual appreciation towards your fellow spiritual practitioners. Well, then when you go and sit down to meditate, well, the mind is already soft and bright and joyful. So you don't need to make an effort to try to force yourself to enjoy your meditation, because you're already in a state of joy through cultivating appreciation and affection for your spiritual companions. And so he says, piti manasikayo pasambati. So when the mind is full of euphoria, then the body becomes tranquil and relaxed. So when you're actually just really loving, just sitting there and paying attention to your body, just sitting there and being present during the meditation practice, then you recognize you don't need to go anywhere or do anything. The desire to move evaporates. And actually, when you're really enjoying the experience of your body during meditation, then you also don't feel pain, which means you don't feel a kind of physical discomfort that gives you the desire to move. So stillness of body is very natural when the mind is full of joy and euphoria. And when the body is still, then one experiences happiness and bliss. So again, this is all coming together. So cultivating this joyful appreciation of one's spiritual community, one's spiritual companions. Then one starts to experience euphoria during meditation, serenity, and happiness and bliss. So all these qualities are arising out of living in a harmonious spiritual community. All of that creates the conditions for joyful meditation practice. And then the Buddha makes this incredibly important line, Sukhino chittang samadhiyati. This is actually one of my favorite quotes from the entire Pali Canon. So the Buddha says this in a number of places. Sukhino chittang samadhiyati. So sukhino means for one who is happy. Chittang is mind. And samadhiyati means enters samadhi. So enters deep concentration. So when one is happy, the mind enters concentration. When one is happy, the mind enters samadhi. So this is really emphasizing the importance of cultivating a sense of happiness and joy in our meditation practice if we want to get deep concentration. So one of the big mistakes that I've seen a lot of people making in their meditation practice is with this grim determination, they grit their teeth and they're like, I will force my mind to be concentrated. I hate this so much, it hurts. Well, of course you're not going to get any concentration that way, because the mind is not happy. But when the mind is happy, then it enters concentration. And it happens naturally. It doesn't take a lot of effort. So cultivating a bright joyfulness in the mind, cultivating an active, joyful appreciation, a euphoric sensation during meditation, then the mind will naturally incline towards samadhi. It will naturally incline towards concentration. So rather than trying to force the mind to be concentrated, instead our effort should be on cultivating a sense of joyfulness and euphoria and ease. And in this sutta, the Buddha is emphasizing that friendliness and appreciation of your spiritual companions is the necessary condition to having joyful meditation. So here again, it's emphasizing the importance of community life as a necessary precursor to developing an effective meditation practice. So then the Buddha gives a metaphor. He says, it's like when the sky rains heavily on a mountaintop and the water flows downhill to fill the hollows, crevices, and creeks. As they become full, they fill up the pools fill up the lakes fill up the streams fill up the rivers, and as the rivers become full, they fill up the ocean. In the same way, when the monks are in harmony, appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes, they create much merit. At that time, the monks live in a holy dwelling, that is, the heart's released by rejoicing. When they're joyful, euphoria arises. When the mind is full of euphoria, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, they feel bliss. And when they're blissful, the mind enters samadhi. So again, it's talking about a natural progression here. Just as it's natural when rain falls, then the water naturally flows towards the oceans, filling up all the lakes and rivers along the way. In the same way, when we cultivate harmonious spiritual community with a mutual commitment to the path and an attitude of mutual friendliness and appreciation, then that naturally starts filling the heart with loving kindness, with compassion, with joyfulness, with equanimity, which then creates the conditions for experiencing joyful euphoric meditation, which then naturally leads the mind towards samadhi, towards the state of bright, joyful stillness, which is the optimal conditions for the development of wisdom. And then the Buddha concludes, these are the three assemblies. And that's the end of the discourse. So at this time we can respect the sutta with three sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to all the people checking in online. Hello to Kumu, Maria, Mike, Jayanta, Charles Lee, Nico, Yankee, Rebecca, Dharmika, and Amaranta, as well as everybody else who's watching online. And we see a question here. So Dharmika says, will arhants live with the Sangha? Or will they be isolated from Sangha, away from the imperfections of the Sangha? Or how will arhants live in Sangha? Do arhants have to give up Sangha also? So, in the suttas, we see many examples of arhants who continued to live with the Sangha. And the main reason they did so was to help the others attain awakening. They did so in order to provide instruction and encouragement and a good example for the others. They did so because when one attains full awakening, then the mind has eliminated all self-centeredness. So an arhat, by their very nature, is completely selfless. By their very nature, they're naturally compassionate, because there's no longer any self-centeredness or selfishness in the mind. And the inclination, therefore, is naturally to be of benefit to others. And the primary way that an arhat is of benefit to others is by helping them in their practice, helping them in their Dhamma practice, helping them to understand and live a life of Dhamma Vinaya. And there are examples of arhats who the way that they helped others was by being an example. So there were arhants who, even though they were fully awakened, they would meditate for many, many hours a day. And when questioned why, they would say, oh, I do this as an example for the others, as an example for the next generation of monks. The Buddha actually did the same thing. The Buddha would periodically spend time on retreat, and people asked him, like, well, what are you doing? You're a fully enlightened Buddha. You don't need to go on retreat. And the Buddha's like, yeah, that's true, I don't. But I do so to set a good example for future generations. So some arhants, again, they would spend a lot of time doing solitary meditation, not because they needed to, because they didn't need to, but in order to set a good example for the other monks, the ones who are not yet awakened. And similarly, there were also some arhants who would live very austere ascetic lives alone in the forest. And again, it's not that they needed to do anything to train their mind further, but rather, again, it was to set an example for the others, to show the others that this way of living was easy and natural for one who has a mind free of defilements, to demonstrate that there is a joyfulness in living a simple, contented life. So an arhat, of course, they would be fully aware of the imperfections of the other unawakened members of the community, but they also wouldn't be bothered by that. An arhat, by definition, is not bothered by anything. And instead, what they would see is they would see an opportunity to be of benefit to others. Okay. And Nico says, this can be challenging in a layperson situation to be in a community that specifically follows the Eightfold Path. Yes, I can't deny it's much harder to live a full and complete Buddhist life as a layperson. It's true. Yeah, it's true. But you do the best you can. But it's acknowledging that as a layperson, one's life is full of conditions which are in opposition to Dhamma. So you have to make a conscious effort to change that about your life. And it's not particularly easy. So there are communities where, actually there's lots of monasteries where lay people come and stay for months or even years at a time. So lay people who aren't necessarily interested in being monks, they just like living in monastic communities for periods of time. Lots of monasteries where you can do that. And you can cultivate community with other dedicated lay people. So when you're not in monasteries, then you can cultivate connections with other dedicated lay people and support each other in that practice. It does take a certain amount of effort for a layperson to practice in this way. It's not quite so easy. Again, sometimes people say that it's hard to be a monk, but actually I think it's the other way around. I think it's hard to be a layperson. There's so many struggles and difficulties and challenges. And Mike says, are the joy and euphoria leading to Sabbani mentioned here the same practice leading to the jhanas? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the last question online. Anything else? Yes?
I just say I really appreciate you being a monk and your discipline and your mind and what Bhante way too. And his kindness, like you said earlier. It's really inspiring. Yeah, everyone else seems really.
Sadhu. Okay. Any other questions? You have something?
Yeah. I'm curious if you'd have more granular advice about cultivating patience in living in community, spiritual community.
So, more granular advice on cultivating patience in spiritual community
With other people.
with other people. One thing I find really helpful is when you're in any kind of difficult situation, especially a situation where the urge is to either run away or say something harsh, or possibly say something harsh and then run away, or where you're just really frustrated with something that somebody is saying or doing. Take a deep breath, let it out slowly. Blink slowly a couple of times. Focus on your body. Come back to that sense of grounded presence, the feeling of your feet pressing against the floor, sense of stability and presence. I was talking yesterday about focusing on the heaviness of the body to bring a sense of solidity and stability and presence. This is one case where that's really useful. And bring up that sense of metta in the heart. Like looking at the person in front of you like they're your best friend, and sometimes your best friend is a little bit silly, but that's okay because they're still your friend. And bringing up that sense of friendliness and kindness towards your friend, even when they're being a little bit goofy. Soften your eyes, bring up those bright, loving eyes. Looking at the person in front of you like, oh, this is actually a really good person who's moving towards awakening, and so delightful that we get a chance to help each other along the path. And then do whatever is appropriate to the situation. Which most of the time is to just, in a friendly, kind, relaxed, tolerant way, you either go along with what the person's suggesting, unless it's really crazy. And if it's really crazy, then you gently redirect them. Or sometimes you just mind your own business. And if it's really a big problem, then later on you can tell the monks what's going on. More likely is later on you're like, actually that really wasn't such a big deal. I don't know why I was making such a big deal out of that. These are a few things I would recommend. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing like living in a community to teach the mind patience. Because at some point you realize there's just nothing else you can do. Like either you leave the community or you develop patience and tolerance. Those are really your only options. Clearly I chose the patience and tolerance option, which might surprise you. I might seem very impatient and intolerant these days, but I'm much better than I used to be. Bhante Wade knows. He knew me a long time ago.
Well, you let me stay here, that's pretty tolerant.
You're very easy to tolerate, Venerable. Okay, anything else? Okay, so we'll go ahead and conclude at this time with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you this evening for Monk Chat.